When Mary Ann Rourke inherited the house on Ashfern Lane, she didn't even remember the name of the aunt who left it to her. Aunt Cecilia, the letter read. Your mother's older sister. She passed peacefully in her sleep. Mary Ann's mother had never spoken of an older sister. Never once. And her mother was not the kind of woman to leave things out. Still, the lawyer was legitimate. The deed was clean. And Mary Ann was desperate. Out of work, single, scraping by in a cramped apartment where the neighbors argued through the walls until dawn. A house in the country sounded like salvation. It wasn't. The house was quiet, too quiet. Covered in ivy, choked by forest. It sat at the end of a gravel road that her GPS couldn't even find. Inside, it smelled of lavender and dust. Like something that had been sealed for years. But everything was perfectly preserved. Not just furniture, but life. Photographs hung in crooked frames. Every room had lace curtains. A fire had already been set in the hearth. There were clothes in the drawers. Fresh sheets on the bed. A teacup still resting on the kitchen counter. Like Aunt Cecilia had just stepped out, and never came back. Mary Ann stayed the first night out of necessity. It was too late to drive back, and the road twisted through woods that grew darker and more tangled by the minute. The kind of dark that turned your high beams into lies. Only showing you how little you could see. She lit a few candles, turned on the antique oil lamp in the parlor, and unpacked a single overnight bag. Upstairs, the bedroom was untouched. A lace canopy hung above the bed, its corners yellowed with age. The window creaked when the wind blew, but the frame held. She lay down in silence, wrapped in too many blankets. No traffic. No distant hum of the city. Just crickets. And the occasional creak from somewhere downstairs. Old house, she told herself. Settling. But at 3:14 a.m., something made her sit upright. She didn't know what. No sound. No movement. Just the certainty that someone had whispered her name. Mary Ann. She held her breath. Listened. Nothing. The hallway outside her door stretched long and dark. The wallpaper curled at the corners like peeling skin. Her phone had no signal. She stayed in bed, wide-eyed until morning. The next morning was bright but cold. Sunlight streamed through the windows in long, dusty beams. Mary Ann made coffee on the old gas stove, the kind with knobs you had to coax into working, holding down the ignition until the flame hissed to life. She told herself she must have dreamed the whisper. Stress. Isolation. She hadn't slept well in weeks. Still, she walked the house with slow, deliberate steps. Looking for something. The floors were solid. No signs of intruders. Doors still locked. But in the upstairs hallway, near the curling wallpaper, something had changed. One section of the wall, a narrow stretch between two bedrooms, was warm to the touch. Warm, like someone had been leaning against it. She pressed her palm to it. A faint thump, like a heartbeat, pulsed beneath. She yanked her hand back. The wallpaper bulged, just for a moment, and then settled. No mice. No heat pipes. Just a silence that pressed in too tightly. She spent the rest of the day outside, tending the garden. Trying not to think about the wall. Trying not to hear the whisper echoing in her mind. Mary Ann, that night, she left the hallway light on. She didn't mean to. She just forgot to turn it off. Or maybe she didn't want to. The soft amber glow leaked beneath her bedroom door, casting warped shadows that moved when they shouldn't. She dreamt of wallpaper peeling back like skin. Of hands pressing through walls, palms dragging down old floral print, leaving faint bloody smears. She woke up gasping. The light in the hallway had gone out. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, padded down the hall. Not toward her room. Past it. Down the stairs. Then silence. She waited. When the sun rose, she crept into the hallway. The bulb had burned out, its glass blackened like a dead eye. Downstairs, the kitchen felt colder. The air tasted metallic. She made toast and left it untouched. Later, while searching the linen closet for new light bulbs, she found something else. A journal. Leather-bound. Hidden behind old blankets. Inside, the same handwriting from the letter that brought her here. Cecilia Rourke. The first page read, Day 3. The house knows I'm here. It waits until I'm alone to breathe. Marianne sat by the fireplace that evening, the journal heavy in her lap. The pages smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent that lingered in the corners of every room. She read aloud softly, voice barely above a whisper. Day 3. The house knows I'm here. It waits until I'm alone to breathe. The floor creaks in apology. The walls hum lullabies I don't remember learning. Marianne flipped the page. The handwriting grew tighter as the entries progressed. Day 7. I found a door behind the pantry. It was covered in boards, nailed shut. But the wood was splintered, from the inside. Something tried to get out. Day 9. I heard my name whispered from the hallway. Not once. Repeatedly. It said, Cece. Cece, let me in. It sounded like my mother. My mother has been dead for 12 years. Marianne's hand trembled as she turned to the next page. It was blank, except for a single line, written in a hurried, shaking scrawl, whatever you do, don't listen to the wallpaper. She closed the journal. The fire crackled. And somewhere upstairs, something scratched. Soft. Rhythmic. Like fingernails tracing old plaster. Marianne didn't sleep that night. The scratching from upstairs continued, not loud, but constant. Like something moving behind the walls. Not mice. Not plumbing. Fingernails. She sat in the hallway at dawn, eyes fixed on the stretch of wallpaper that had once pulsed with warmth. Now, it breathed. The faded floral print shifted ever so slightly, like lungs inhaling beneath old skin. She stood, grabbed the corner of the curling paper, and pulled. It tore like parchment, dry and brittle, revealing faded plaster. But beneath that, something else. Writing. Dozens of names, carved directly into the wall. Small, delicate handwriting. The same style as Cecilia's journal. Dozens of names. Some full. Some just first names. All etched in long, looping strokes. One name repeated more than any other, Marianne. Carved over and over. She stepped back, knees weak. And from the paper that still clung to the wall, a whisper drifted, barely audible. You're already part of the house. Marianne barely remembered falling asleep. She only remembered waking to silence. Not the normal kind. Not peaceful. A hollow silence. The kind that rings in your ears like something has just ended. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Everything in the kitchen was slightly off. The chairs had moved. The coffee mug she'd left out was gone. And the pantry door, previously sealed, painted shut and covered by a shelf, was now standing wide open. A chill ran through her. She stepped closer. The shelves had been dragged aside, revealing a narrow door embedded in the wall. Dark wood. Iron handle. Carvings along the frame that looked like vines, or veins. This wasn't here before. It couldn't have been. She reached for the handle. It was warm. She yanked her hand back. The journal. Cecilia's journal had warned her. I found a door behind the pantry. Something tried to get out. Marianne stepped away. And the door slowly, quietly, began to open on its own. A voice, low and wet, slithered out from the darkness behind it. "Cece." Marianne stood frozen, staring into the black mouth of the open door. "Cece," the voice whispered again. Not pleading. Not confused. Hopeful. Like a thing that had waited far too long and still believed. She stepped back. Just once. And the voice changed. Deeper. Hungrier. "You're not Cece." The pantry door slammed shut with a thunderous crack, dust billowing outward. The shelf toppled back into place on its own. And the warmth that had lingered behind the walls turned suddenly cold. Dead cold. Marianne fled upstairs, locking the bedroom door behind her. She didn't sleep. Instead, she read through more of the journal. Day 12, the door opens when you acknowledge it. Close your eyes. Pretend it's not real. That's the only way it goes away. Day 15, I stopped writing for 2 days. I think that's when it got stronger. It feeds on silence. On forgetting. It hates when I remember what it really is. I think it wears our names like a mask. The following evening, Marianne noticed a mirror in the hallway that she was certain hadn't been there before. Oval. Brass-framed. Fogged at the edges like old breath. She stood before it. Her reflection blinked, out of sync with her. It smiled faintly. She didn't. Marianne stepped closer, staring deep into her own eyes, but they weren't hers. Slightly too wide. Too bright. Like they were seeing through her instead of out from her. She whispered, "Cece." The reflection's lips moved, but not with that name. Marianne. Her heart stopped. It had said her name, her real name, but the voice in her mind was not her own. It sounded like her mother. Only, wrong. Warped. Like someone mimicking her from memory. She turned and ran, the mirror humming softly behind her. In her bedroom, she slammed the door and turned to lock it. There, written across the inside of the door in red crayon, "Marianne, come home." She hadn't brought any crayons. The next morning, Marianne found the crayons still on the floor. It rolled under her foot when she stepped back. She picked it up with shaking hands. The brand was unfamiliar, no label, no wrapper. Just a red wax stick, soft and warm like it had been held tightly, recently. She grabbed the journal and flipped toward the back, hoping for more. Day 18, it's learning my memories. I hear my mother's voice. My father's whistle. But it's never quite right. Like hearing them underwater, or through a dream I didn't mean to wake from. It found the box under my bed. It knew things I'd buried even from myself. It left me a drawing. A child's drawing of me, standing outside. But I was inside the house. Watching through the window. Smiling. Marianne's hands trembled. She flipped the page. There was no more writing. Only a drawing. A crude crayon sketch of the house. In the upstairs window, a little girl. Face blank. Arms stretched toward the glass. Underneath the picture, in barely legible cursive, I let myself in. Marianne spent the rest of the day trying to convince herself to leave. She packed a bag. Kept her keys in her hand. She told herself she'd leave by sunset. But when she opened the front door, there was nothing outside. No gravel path. No trees. Just a thick gray fog that rolled in like tidewater, pressing against the threshold like a living wall. She closed the door. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. She stood in the foyer, suitcase in hand, staring up the staircase. At the top stood a girl. Small. Pale. Wearing a dress that looked like something out of a photograph from the 1940s. The girl didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. Marianne's voice cracked. "Who are you?" The girl smiled faintly and said, "I'm the part of you that stayed." She turned and walked down the hall, toward the room behind the pantry. The door was open again. Marianne stepped into the pantry. The shelf had moved again. On its own. Of course. The door behind it stood wide open. Beyond it, a narrow corridor stretched out, impossibly long, much longer than should fit within the walls of a modest country house. Old wallpaper peeled like bark, curling inward as if the walls had been breathing in for too long. At the far end, a wooden door. Slightly ajar. A warm yellow glow spilling through the crack like candlelight. She moved slowly. Her feet didn't make a sound on the wood floor. Halfway down the hall, she passed a mirror. Oval. Brass-framed. This time, the reflection showed the little girl walking beside her. But when she turned, no one was there. She reached the final door. Inside, a child's bedroom. The same one from the crayon drawing. Lace curtains. A porcelain doll resting on the pillow. A tea set arranged neatly on a dusty table. And in the far corner, facing the wall, a figure. Long black hair. Nightgown. Pale arms dangling limp at her sides. The air buzzed. Thick with pressure. Then the figure turned around. It was her. The woman standing across the room was identical to Marianne, every detail exact. Same hair. Same scar on the cheek from a childhood fall. Same eyes. But the way she moved. Wrong. Too fluid. Like limbs following the idea of motion rather than muscle and bone. The copy tilted its head. "Do you know how long I've waited?" it said, voice honeyed and familiar. "You left me here." Marianne's throat tightened. "You're not me." The doppelganger smiled wider. "I'm who you forgot. The version of you who stayed curious. Who opened doors you were too afraid to." She stepped closer. The floor didn't creak beneath her. "You grew out of me. You put me away like a box of old things in an attic." But the house, her eyes glinted. The house remembered. Marianne backed toward the door. The copy didn't follow. Instead, she pointed to the tea table. 3 cups. 2 full. 1 waiting. Marianne turned and fled. The hallway stretched longer behind her than before. The mirrors on the wall now showed her running from nothing at all. Marianne burst into the kitchen, chest heaving, palms slick with sweat. But something was wrong. The light was different. Dimmer. Older. A smell lingered, dust, lavender, and something metallic. She reached for her phone, no signal. No time on the screen. Just static. She turned to leave the room. And found herself, in the kitchen again. Exactly the same. Only this time, the stove was lit. A teapot whistled faintly. She stepped back through the doorway. Still the kitchen. This version had a letter sitting on the counter, addressed to Cece Rourke. She turned again. Kitchen. Another version. The fridge door hung open now, its inside light blinking. Each door she stepped through, each attempt to escape, brought her back. Not to the same kitchen, but different echoes of it. In one, the wallpaper was torn. In another, her mother stood at the sink, back turned, unmoving. In another still, the stove burned a letter with her name on it. Marianne Rourke. The house wasn't letting her leave. It was showing her everything she'd forgotten, and everything she was meant to become. And behind her, through every loop, the whisper followed, "Drink your tea. It's getting cold." Marianne stopped running. There was no point. Every door looped. Every window showed a reflection. Not of outside, but of other versions of the room she stood in. Older, darker, more decayed. She stepped through one last kitchen door, and found herself in the child's bedroom again. The tea set was waiting. 3 cups. 2 full. And now, the third was steaming gently. The doppelganger sat at the table, hands folded, head tilted. Finally, it said, "You always make me wait." Marianne's voice was low. "What is this?" The reflection smiled. "A choice. A memory. A meal." She pointed to the cup. "Drink." No, the room shivered. The walls trembled slightly. "Drink, or stay unfinished," the voice hissed, losing its sweetness. "You think the house whispers because it wants to frighten you?" She leaned closer. "It whispers because it's hungry." And Marianne finally understood. It didn't just trap people. It learned them. Studied them. Wore them. Made them drink their own selves until there was nothing left but a whisper in the wallpaper. A name carved into a wall. A smile in the mirror that doesn't belong. Marianne stared at the teacup. The steam twisted into shapes. A little girl. A mirror. A hallway with no end. Inside the cup, her reflection blinked, then smiled. "No," she whispered. She grabbed the cup and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, spraying hot liquid and shards of porcelain across the dollhouse rug. The doppelganger flinched. The room groaned, the house itself reacting like a wounded animal. "You're not allowed to say no," the reflection hissed. Marianne stepped forward. "Then throw me out." The floor cracked. The walls rippled. The third teacup on the table began to bleed red liquid, thick and slow. "You're already part of the house," it growled. "Even your no belongs to me now." Marianne turned and ran. This time, the hallway was solid. Narrow. Real. She followed the sound of her own breath, her own heartbeat, until she reached the foyer. The front door was closed. But the fog outside was gone. She reached for the handle. It turned. But before she could pull it open, a whisper brushed the back of her neck. "If you leave, who stays?" She turned. The girl stood at the top of the stairs again, smiling. Marianne stared at the girl on the stairs. She was no longer ghostly or distant. Her skin had color. Her eyes sparkled with something dangerously alive. "I'm the version that stayed," the girl said. "You don't get to leave without leaving something behind." Marianne's hand tightened on the door handle. "You're not real," she whispered. The girl laughed, a high, crystalline sound that echoed through the house like breaking glass. "Neither are you. Not anymore. You've been peeled open, and the house has already started writing over you." Marianne stepped back. "No. I'm not staying here. I won't become her." The girl tilted her head. "You don't become anything. You just fade, until you're a story told by the wallpaper. Until someone else finds the journal." Behind Marianne, the doorknob began to cool in her hand, hardening like stone. She made a choice. She turned from the door, and ran toward the fireplace. Cecilia's journal was still there. She grabbed it. The last page had rewritten itself. Day 21, the only way out is to take your name back. Burn the name. Burn the mirror. Burn the memory. Marianne stood slowly. She finally understood. The house wasn't alive. It was made alive, by memory. By names. And if she was going to escape, she had to forget herself. Marianne moved with purpose now. She tore down the mirror in the hallway, the one that blinked out of sync. It shattered in her hands, slicing her palm. She didn't flinch. In the parlor, she found the crayon, the red one used to write her name on the door. She dragged it across the wallpaper, scribbling over every place her name appeared, Marianne, 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 until the paper bled. Upstairs, she opened every drawer and closet, gathering letters, labels, old photographs. Anything that named her. Anything that tied her to this version of herself. She threw it all into the fireplace. The house moaned. From the pantry, the door creaked open again, wider this time. The doppelganger stood inside the threshold. "Stop," it hissed. "If you forget, we both die." Marianne held the last thing in her hand. Her driver's license. Her real name. Her real face. She stared at it one final time, then tossed it into the fire. The house screamed. Every window shattered. The floor twisted beneath her feet. Walls buckled. The girl at the top of the stairs crumbled into dust, no longer sustained by the memory of who she was meant to be. The door behind Marianne burst open, spilling fog and sunlight into the foyer. The house was collapsing. She ran. Marianne ran through the collapsing hallway, the wallpaper shriveling and peeling away like scorched skin. Rooms that once whispered now howled. The pantry cracked open wider, revealing not the child's bedroom, but a black void stretching down and down and down. She didn't look back. She burst through the front door into sunlight and fog. And then, silence. The house was gone. No structure behind her. No gravel path. Just open woods, and the faint smell of smoke. She walked for hours before finding the road, an old highway she didn't recognize. A trucker found her near dusk, walking barefoot along the shoulder. She didn't remember her name. Couldn't recall how she got there. Didn't even know where there was. All she knew was the sound of her heartbeat, and a faint voice in the back of her mind whispering, "You chose to forget. Don't look back." She didn't. Not then. Not for years. Marianne lived a quiet life after that. At least, she thought that was her name. People called her that, so she accepted it. She worked at a library. She lived in a small apartment with plants she never remembered buying, and a cat that had no name but followed her everywhere. Sometimes, in the middle of shelving books or making tea, a sound would echo in her mind. A soft tap, tap, tap. She'd pause. Blink. It would pass. She told herself she had just imagined it. That she hadn't once lived in a house that wasn't on any map. That she hadn't burned her own name just to escape a life something else wanted to wear. Until one evening, a girl came into the library. Small. Pale. Wearing a faded dress with lace cuffs. She handed Marianne a note, smiled, and said, "I think this belongs to you." Marianne opened it. A single sentence, written in red crayon, "You left the door open." That night, Marianne returned home and found a small brass-framed mirror resting on her kitchen table. She hadn't put it there. She didn't own one like it. The glass was fogged at the corners. Her hands trembled as she approached. She saw herself, older now. Wiser. Whole. But behind her reflection, the wallpaper. That same faded floral print. A hallway stretching out. And the faintest sound, like fingernails tracing the inside of her skull. Tap, tap, tap. The mirror began to hum. Her reflection blinked. Out of sync. Then smiled. The same voice she had forgotten, the one that had waited, whispered one last time, "Marianne, it's your turn to remember." She reached for the mirror. But stopped. This time, she didn't touch it. She turned away. Walked to the window. Opened it wide. And let the night air wash the memory clean. Behind her, the tapping slowed, then faded, then vanished. And the house that whispered, waited once more. For the next name. For the next door left ajar. For the next person who thinks forgotten places stay buried forever.